What if we took the challenge of climbing the tallest mountain in the world, but made it even harder? Well, that's exactly what 30-year-old Tomas Olsson did. A team under the name The Vikings Are Back traveled to Tibet in the spring of 2006 with the aim of summiting Everest and descending by skiing off the mountain. Tomas would be part of this group, but wanted to take the challenge a step further. There have been individuals who have successfully skied down Everest before, but nobody has done it following the most dangerous route possible, the steep north face. This is his story. Tomas Olsson was born in Sweden in the 1970s, and by high school had a pretty good idea of what he wanted to do with his life. Being from Sweden, the popular sport is skiing, and Tomas instantly gravitated towards it. His college years were filled with various ski trips, and it was at this time that his love for climbing also began. After graduating in 2001, Tomas moved to Chamonix, better known as the location of Mont Blanc, where he devoted himself to the sport and became a professional extreme skier. Multiple times throughout the years, Tomas would travel to exotic locations to explore and test his abilities. Most notably are his descents of Aconcagua in Argentina, Peak Lenin in Kyrgyzstan, Mustag Ata, Kuksay Peak in China, and Cho Oyu in Tibet. But none of these accomplishments could compare to what Tomas was determined to attempt next. Instead, he had an idea, a crazy idea, to stand on the summit of Everest and ski down the north face, otherwise known as the Great Northern Couloir. In terms of difficulty, this route is much more challenging to traverse than almost any other route on Everest. It is one of, if not, the sharpest inclines on the entire mountain. Those familiar with the area claim that a fall, if not halted by a rock, will likely end in the deep, white snow at the base of the mountain. To put it in perspective, in the history of Everest, there has only been one successful summit following this route. Keep in mind that the men would only need to descend on skis, as their ascent would be following the much easier Mallory route. Now, Tomas knew that this would be no easy feat, and so with this idea in motion, he began training his body and mind for the journey, from many miles of cycling to multiple summits of Mont Blanc and hundreds of ski descents. Tomas spent a full year doing everything he could think of that would help him achieve his goal. In the spring of 2006, he was finally ready, but would not be making this journey alone. Norwegian friend and professional skier Termod Gronheim accompanied Tomas, as well as photographer Fredrik Schienholm, who would be watching from afar. The men would reach Everest from the less popular Tibetan side and spend the next month making the necessary preparations. Multiple acclimatization trips were completed in order for his body to grow accustomed to the altitude. Passing snowstorms caused various delays, but would not deter the men from their goal. Eventually in May, it was time. Olsson and Gronheim set out for the summit on May 14th from Advanced Base Camp at 6,400 meters. All the weather predictions showed that there would be some varying storms, but nothing too major that would prevent disruptions from their climb. There was a constant fog that sat on the mountain, preventing visibility to about 100 meters in any direction, and this would cause some delays, but ultimately not prevent them from climbing. Their first day proved to be a huge success. It was spent climbing fast, so successful in fact that once they decided to make camp, they were already a full day ahead of schedule. The men pitched their tents with the sun still in the sky and rested, preparing for an early morning. They woke up at around 11 p.m. that same day, noticeably colder than earlier. When Tomas exited his tent, he could just barely make out the sky filled with clouds, and the realization of what was to come began to set in. Both men looked at each other, took a deep sigh, quickly ate their breakfast, and set out on the mountain right before midnight. They made excellent progress scaling Everest at a very fast pace. There was little noise on the mountain, other than the wind or snow crunching under their boots, and even fewer people, as the Tibetan side had much less traffic than the approach from Nepal. After a few hours of climbing, the sun began to rise, but was hardly noticeable as the clouds sitting above the men began dumping snow on the mountain. Their visibility was limited to about 40 meters in front of them, and they had to focus on working as a team if they were to continue. As you can imagine, the storm greatly slowed their progress, but surprisingly their spirits were high, so they kept moving. Both men had spent many months preparing for this trip, and they were determined to reach their goal. Step after step, rope after rope, they scaled the tallest mountain in the world. The wind constantly blew snow into their covered faces, providing no reprieve from the cold. They could see little around them, and at times questioned if they were even heading in the right direction. But every once in a while, a key feature on the mountain would stand out, indicating that they were on the right path. There was little time for thought or talk. Instead, they just kept going. After 14 hours of battling a fierce snowstorm, both men broke out into smiles as they stood on the top of Everest. Because they set out so early, it was only 1 p.m., but the storm had required them to exert more energy than they had anticipated. Tomas was highly optimistic, but made a side comment to Tormod, expressing that he hoped they had enough strength to ski. Their ascent becomes even more impressive when compared to others, as it only took 2 days for the pair to summit, when on average the Mallory route takes 5 days to reach the pinnacle. But as every mountaineer knows, the climb up is only half the battle. For Tomas and Tormod, their real challenge was only just beginning. Luckily, the weather had turned for the better, and there was no longer a storm obstructing their visibility. After a few minutes of enjoying the view, the pair took the skis off their backs and strapped themselves in. They set off at 1:20 p.m. and within minutes covered 200 meters and were already on the balcony. Tormod led initially, and Tomas followed as the second skier. After the balcony came a narrow and steep gully, which they skied down until stopping at a snow patch on a cliff located above the rock band, which also lies on top of the Norton Couloir, the most dangerous section. They moved fast, but on their way down to this location, Tomas heard a crack and noticed it was more difficult to control his left ski. Once the men had stopped to plan out their next move, Tomas looked down at his equipment and cursed. His left ski was broken behind the binding, and this meant serious trouble for the pair, high on Everest's unforgiving north side. Both men became slightly stressed from the situation, but did not panic. Instead, they attempted to repair the ski with duct tape and climbing gear. It was nothing fancy, but they were confident it would hold until the ski was no longer needed. They assessed their location and realized they would have to rappel down the cliff they were on before being able to ski. However, being in a snowfield, they failed to find a rock to use as a belay point for their rope. So instead, they were forced to make their own solution, which involves using 2 snow sticks and 1 ice axe as anchors. Considering that Tomas had broken his ski, he proceeded to strap himself in first and rappel down the cliff. Tormod watched from above as he moved 10 meters down, then 20, and 30. Then all of a sudden, the anchors gave way, causing Tomas to plummet approximately 10 meters down into the Norton Couloir. Tormod tried catching the rope as it fell, but it was to no avail. The fog prevented Tormod from seeing what happened to Tomas, almost like he disappeared in a cloud, and when he yelled, he received no response. Tormod knew he now had to descend, but did not trust the anchors or rope to hold him anymore, so he looked for anything that he could use as an anchor. To make matters worse, his mask had stopped working, and he now had to continue without supplemental oxygen. Tormod spent an hour searching, trying different tactics, but at this point, it was 5 p.m. and he had to move. So instead of using a rope, he decided to free climb instead. Tormod skillfully scaled the rock, and once he reached the bottom, he saw no signs of Tomas anywhere. Even his gear was nowhere to be seen. Now this section of the mountain is really where the incline began to be a problem, and many climbers claim that it is so steep a fall will continue for thousands of meters unless halted by a rock or ice axe. Tormod did not spend much time debating or even thinking about what happened. Instead, he focused on descending to get himself out of harm's way. He skied down the Norton Couloir, but on his way down, spotted something out of the corner of his eye. He approached the object and got a better look, only to find out it was Tomas's ice axe and crampons. Notably, however, there were no indications of Tomas attempting to stop his fall. Not wanting to pause for long, Tormod took a mental note of the location. Instead of continuing the difficult route he was on, he transitioned his way over to the North Ridge, which was a much easier path, and continued to ski down the mountain. The excitement was completely gone, as Tormod could only think about the snow in front of him. He would make it safely back, and although his accomplishment was something to be proud of, the mood was immensely sorrowful, as those at camp learned that Tomas would not be returning. Because there was no sign of stoppage, it led those to believe that Tomas lost consciousness when he hit the snow from his fall, and thus just continued to roll down the mountain as nothing was there to prevent his momentum. Within a week, 2 Sherpas had found Tomas Olsson dead, and about 2,500 meters down the mountain from the location of his tragic fall. His body was located in a heavy avalanche zone, so the Sherpas lowered him 300 meters out of the danger area and left him for the night. They returned the next morning with proper assistance and successfully recovered Tomas on Everest. Tomas Olsson dedicated his life to skiing down some of the highest summits in the world. He was a professional and true athlete, and one that was determined in his goal. But on Everest, a series of events led to his tragedy, further emphasizing that on the mountains, it does not matter if you are prepared, a beginner, or an advanced climber. Sometimes, bad things just happen.